Today, I want to discuss a really strange topic. Basically, should you ban players for exploiting a game when those exploits are a product of poor design and not based on brute forcing your way into the actual code? This is largely in response to the Division 2 and the recent decision by Massive Entertainment to ban an unknown but extremely high number of players for their participation in a damage glitch that led to ridiculously high damage output, effectively making all the content in the game extremely easy. Some players use this to farm thousands of SHD levels, which are the end game progression mechanic making your character incrementally stronger, and others used it a single time just to test it out for fun. The range in between these two extremes is also quite large. There's a lot of players in that middle ground, and the ban numbers were not, as far as I could tell, ever officially released, so there's no way to know exactly how many players were suspended. Suspended for 7 days, by the way, that was the determined length, and on top of this, flagged accounts would also be rolled back to, quote, a save from March 17th, which means any players who got hit by this would not only be locked out for 7 days, they would also lose weeks of progress, possibly some of which had been exploited, but also a great deal that had not been exploited. This is where we get into the speculatory part. It cannot be known except by Massive themselves how many players were illegitimately banned. However, there is no doubt at all that some players were caught in the crossfire, and an even larger number were slammed with both of these sanctions while having barely used the exploit at all. But since they have not released any actual numbers, it is very hard to tell what the legitimate severity of the issue actually is. I can personally say anecdotally that I've been inundated with messages about this topic, comments on my live streams, and other forms of reaching out about the issue on social media, so from an individual perspective, I see a large wave of skepticism and fear based on this decision, which would seem to indicate far-reaching effects and ramifications. Not only that, but as far as I have been able to tell, looking into the situation and discussing with a number of very active players who are in the game right now, I myself have not been active in the Division 2 for quite some time. I played the DLC, but then got sidetracked with other games and projects, but as far as I have been informed, the damage glitch that caused the entire banning wave is still active and abusable within the game. I have now heard reports that matchmaking is somewhat of a ghost town. The first ban wave hit very hard, and with the exploit still in fact active, it requires the question, will they execute another wave in the near future for further exploits? Or was this a one-time thing? Now, historically, the Division franchise has an on-again, off-again relationship with exploitation. Sometimes minor, sometimes extreme. In the original game, entire gear sets and item pieces were horribly bugged to the point of near infinite damage or infinite health regeneration at 2% per second for months, and literally everyone used them because that's just how the game was constructed. In Division 2, the situation is no better. There are numerous bugs, exploits, and glitches made possible by errors in the game's code, and keeping in mind that an enormous ban wave on top of an account rollback for all flagged accounts has left the game somewhat depopulated right now, and the possibility of yet another of these waves remains quite high, assuming that the developers stick to any sort of consistent policy, I want to discuss the entire concept of banning players for exploiting flaws that were programmed directly into the game. Personally, I agree with some sort of rollback. I don't think it should be very long, and I doubt my vision of an account rollback could ever actually be implemented, but I would picture that on every day that the system flags your account as having used the exploit, if it's possible to go that deep and identify when damage spiked to an extreme degree that was mathematically impossible without the exploit to ensure only offending accounts were targeted. On that particular day, and any other where the exploit was used, all account progress would be rolled back, again, for that particular day. Honestly, my version is probably not possible, but I do believe that some form of sanction is necessary when dealing with widespread exploitation of game mechanics, especially if they are severely detrimental, and it is widespread in the Division franchise, it always has been. However, a full week suspension on top of a multi-week rollback, which has caught many accounts in the crossfire who barely touched the exploit, did not touch it at all, or alternatively missed a great many of the largest offenders, which has been verified on Reddit by certain users and backed up elsewhere on the Ubisoft forums and other social media. All of these measures and effects combined make this ban wave something far greater than the reasonable minimum. In fact, I would call this response an unreasonable extreme. Conceptually, the idea of banning players for using mechanics that are available in the game as a result of code or mechanical error, and not a result of them actually damaging or invading the infrastructure of the game in any capacity, to me is somewhat extraordinary. You are effectively banning players for using what you made, the way that you made it, just not the way you intended for them to use it. Yet again, the Division franchise has a very long history with this. From inception, the development team had a vision for how this game would be played, and having gotten to see a snapshot of that vision firsthand for the original game, though less for the sequel, admittedly, I can say confidently that their vision is not even close to how the players adapted the meta based on what was available. The vision was one of near harmony somehow, whereas the meticulous and progression-oriented player base utilized the broken and janky infrastructure to maximize their own ability to defeat one another in head-to-head combat. The crux of the issue, as it has always been with this game, is inconsistency. Other industry peers like PUBG, for example, though not technically a looter shooter or even being close to the same genre at all, will actually publicly state this many players were banned for hacking or exploitation. Even other Ubisoft titles have public real-time info such as Rainbow Six Siege, which will notify you when hackers get nuked, and there will be rating changes on top of it to compensate those who were affected by their behavior. The Division 2 seems to have arbitrarily picked one of many existing exploits and nuked a massive chunk of their own players without disclosing how many, for a double tap effect with a multi-week rollback on top of it. And the question is now spiraling out of control, will they do it again? Why did they pick this particular exploit? In the past, there were infinite loot glitches or many other comparable situations and nothing at all happened. Why now? What's next? Why should we even play this game anymore? How about one step further? The Division 2 is a rather socially constructed game. A lot of the most meaningful activities require a squad to complete. Raids, for instance, are considered the pinnacle of endgame content and are 8-player squad-based instances. But this ban wave has now struck down a large section of the players who were, most likely, some of the more hardcore, diligently playing, and actively progressing agents in the game with the highest levels of relative character power. This means that some players who were entirely innocent have now lost their own squad mates and friends, temporarily at first, but then the progression wipe on top of that. Let's not forget, though it may seem disconnected, we are currently in a nearly worldwide lockdown. The pandemic has seen hundreds of millions of people self-quarantine or self-isolate and has also spiked video game playtime and sales. Wiping out weeks of progress for large chunks of your player base when those weeks were probably some of the most active they have ever played, that's not a good decision. And I know that the true individuals responsible for that will never watch this video, but if by some miracle they do, you fucked up. You fucked up bad, and you need to be told that, flat out. The easy comparison here is Bungie and the Destiny franchise. Bungie has been faced with some pretty insane exploits over the years, and their response was to fix the exploits, not nuke the players who use them. Now, if players were participating in PvP using these exploits in the Dark Zone, griefing other players, a suspension or high rollback is much more justified. However, that is just a small sliver of those who were flagged, or might be flagged in the future, and the entire situation creates an atmosphere of frustration and definitely uncertainty. As I said before, this franchise has a long history with broken mechanics. The Division and the Division 2 are not polished games, not even close. Half the time players end up using exploits without even knowing it. I'm not suggesting that for this particular instance that would be the case. From what I understand, the exploit was a multi-stage, somewhat complicated process, but there was an error where getting hit in the past with a certain ability while another ability was firing in the original game would make your character run in place on enemy screens while still being able to run around and shoot on your own. The result was that sometimes players would just get a free temporary invisibility cheat without knowing, or even worse, another instance existed, and still exists by the way, where a net limiter can be used that makes it so your connection becomes unstable, meaning you can run up to and kill with ease anyone who is far away from you or attempting to escape, and there is nothing that they can do because the game's infrastructure is so broken. Are these going to be bannable offenses? Are these going to be enforced ever in the future? When your game's infrastructure is like a termite-ridden foundation, do you blame and punish the tenants of the building when stuff starts falling down? It's an imperfect comparison, but the reality is Massive Entertainment, the developers behind The Division 2, are taking a sledgehammer to a screen door with this one. It seems like they are trying to send a message, but at what cost? Maybe a more meaningful question would be, why are players even doing this? Maybe the enemies are too bullet spongy and feeling powerful is enjoyable. Maybe the progression curve was too slow or felt unrewarding. Maybe it was neither or something in between. But the only wrong answer here, the only one, is going to war with your own player base. And that's exactly what they've done. The concept of protecting non-offending players is a good one. If a ban wave hits that prioritize those who promoted the exploit to others and those who actively used it to degrade the experience of other players, I think Massive would have seen minimal backlash on this one, and much more outspoken support. However, this particular ban wave is not going to only hit that demographic. It's going to wipe out little Johnny down the road who saw the exploit on YouTube and desperately wanted to be able to do the harder missions without dying every single time by himself. So he tried it out to make things more enjoyable, since he doesn't have a mic or might not enjoy playing with others. And now he gets his entire account shot into space as the past 3 weeks of progress get wiped out completely. Let's read between the lines here. The message is play our game the right way, be faced with countless glitches, inconsistent loot, and unbalanced gameplay. Or play our game the wrong way, use system circumvention to get around some of these known issues, and we might take an axe to your legs by wiping out tons of past progress and also suspending you for 7 days on top of that. That message is bad for business, it's bad for player sentiment, and it's bad for the reputation of the game. Bottom line, you are punishing players, heavily punishing them, by the way, I might add. When I first got told about this, I didn't know it was the dual-prong approach with 3 weeks of progress gone on top of it. You are punishing players for your own mistakes, and that won't sit well, regardless of technical terms of service agreements. But now I'm very curious, what do all of you think who are watching this right now? What was the proper response? Was this it? If yes, why? If not, why not? Because as far as I can tell, having finally looked into it extensively, they had no right answer. No matter what they did, it was going to go badly because past actions and game infrastructure are now at odds with one another, and the player base is in the crossfire getting torpedoed. That's it for today. If you want to support, there are links down below: Twitter, Patreon, merch, other social media, etc., as well as another YouTuber to support who is establishing himself on the platform. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.